Trading for a quarterback would not be the best move for the New Orleans Saints this offseason, except, well, one quarterback. We got all that and a little bit of lagniappe for you on today's episode of Locked On Saints.
You are Locked On Saints, your daily New Orleans Saints podcast. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
What is good, Who Dat Nation and Who Dat family? Welcome into another episode of Locked On Saints, your daily podcast covering your favorite team, the New Orleans Saints. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. Thanks so much as always, making Locked On Saints your first listen of the day every day. Don't forget we're free and available on all podcast apps and on YouTube as well. I'm your host, Ross Jackson, at Ross Jackson Nola on Twitter, your New Orleans Saints expert, credential member of the media, CrescentCitySports.com, USA Today's Saints Wire, Tuesdays on Locked On NFL. And here with you every single Monday through Friday, and then some on Locked On Saints. Today's episode of Locked On Saints brought to you by our friends over at FanDuel Sportsbook, America's #1 sportsbook. Make every moment more by visiting FanDuel.com/LockedOn to get started today. On today's episode, we're getting you ready for the defensive side of the combine workouts and drills. We'll take a look at some linebackers and cornerbacks or defensive backs that could be of interest to New Orleans. But we'll start off with some defensive linemen, whether they be interior or edge rushers, that could have an immediate impact for the club at some big-time positions of need over on that side of the ball. But first, why the New Orleans Saints have no need to trade for a quarterback this offseason. And the fact of the matter here is that unless the Saints are trading for Lamar Jackson, trading for a quarterback just doesn't make any sense given the options. Now, I could even make an argument against trading for Lamar Jackson, right? Run-heavy quarterback that's experienced some injuries over the course of the past couple of years that can throw the ball very well, regardless of the people that will tell you that he can't. But are you going to pay that much money for a quarterback after spending top draft capital in order to get him to New Orleans? Maybe not the best choice. But when you look at some of the other options that are out there, you have to wonder if the sort of level of mystery that involves drafting a guy like, let's say, Hendon Hooker, for instance, in the second round, maybe even at the bottom of the first, depending upon who else is on the board at that time. That same level of mystery surrounds targets like New York Jets quarterback Zach Wilson and Chicago Bears quarterback Justin Fields, certainly New England Patriots quarterback Mac Jones. So going to free agency to land a quarterback like Derek Carr, who the Saints are pretty much all in on at this point, makes sense. If the Seahawks fumble the bag when it comes to Geno Smith, the Saints pursuing a guy like Geno Smith makes sense. But the only thing more devastating than spending draft capital on a quarterback that you don't know is going to pan out in the NFL is spending draft capital on a quarterback that you've already seen not pan out in the NFL. Now, Justin Fields might be a little bit more of an exception than the other guys that I'm categorizing here. But guys like Zach Wilson in particular, they're kind of just as much a hard pass for me in the trade scenario as signing Carson Wentz in the offseason is. Both very much hard passes for me. There was a betting site out there that put up a hypothetical about how, the Saints could trade for Zach Wilson by giving up a second and a fourth round pick. And to me, that's just as much a waste of that second and fourth round pick than it is to season your crawfish after you boil them, right? I would rather send a second and fourth round pick to Houston for bad crawfish. I'm just playing with you, Houston, but you know it's true. You got to put the seasoning in the boil. So what is it that the Saints should do? Because trading for a quarterback just doesn't really make sense for them. Now, if you can trade a conditional day 3 selection for, a Justin Fields, or you get some type of a steal like that, then maybe we're having a different conversation here. Or maybe another quarterback becomes available that the Saints could potentially make a move on. But just based on the options that are available now, I don't think that is the route that the Saints should consider going. So instead, I look at what the New Orleans Saints are already doing. We're hearing it all over the place now. Mickey Loomis talking about how his visit with the Saints' visit with Derek Carr went really well. Dennis Allen highlighting the relationship that they have with Derek Carr, that he already has with Derek Carr, viewing Derek Carr as somebody that is has a big work ethic and that is a natural born leader, and those qualities being big time qualities that they care about in New Orleans. Now, for me, if it's Derek Carr or if it's another viable free agent, I don't care, right? I mean, either way, I still think drafting a quarterback makes sense. But let's just say the Saints do successfully go down this Derek Carr route. I still think that drafting Hendon Hooker makes sense. I would say that drafting a quarterback in the third round, like maybe that's where you roll the dice on an Aidan O'Connell, who I'm not confident will pan out in the NFL. But hey, he comes in, he effectively gets to learn behind, an NFL veteran and all. The Saints, they see Derek Carr, if they sign him, as a long-term option, not just a stopgap, but they can build a contract that says, okay, well, we can get out of it in 2 years, we get out of it in 3 years if they want to. So I don't think that drafting a quarterback goes out the window if they do land Derek Carr. And certainly if you were to do something like, I don't know, if Seattle does screw this up and they somehow don't sign Geno Smith to a contract, I'm almost team Geno over team Carr, if I'm being honest. In which case you draft a Geno Smith, you have him on a short-term deal. You draft a Hendon Hooker, you let Hendon Hooker learn behind somebody that completely rebranded his entire career late in his years. Good big-time mentor for a guy like Hendon Hooker, who, by the way, has a similar skill set. Yeah, I'm all about that more than I am about the idea that you're going to go out and potentially do one of these weird hypothetical trades that you'll see from some of these websites. The weird hypothetical trades are hypothetical probably for a reason. Now, that's not to say that they won't happen, but it is to say that I would be very, very critical of any of those decisions. Again, short a very highly valued and good value Justin Fields trade or a Lamar Jackson trade, which I could still maybe get a little grumpy about if I really wanted to. And by the way, whether it's the Saints landing Derek Carr in free agency, whether it's the Saints landing Geno Smith in free agency, Jimmy Garoppolo in free agency, or whether they're turning the clock back to Andy Dalton or Jameis Winston, I think trying to solve things with Michael Thomas can't be ruled out either and should probably be something that the Saints are willing to consider. And it would make a ton of sense. Yeah, Michael Thomas isn't going to throw the ball for you. He's not going to be your quarterback, but if you get him back and can keep him healthy and build a contract that rewards him for staying healthy and for his performance throughout 2023, you'll have to restructure the deal that presently exists with over $60 million potentially becoming available and guaranteed to him in 2024 if he's on the roster at the beginning of the league year in 2023 or plays 4 games in 2023. You got to redo all that stuff and make a contract that makes sense. But all of that stuff can be redone. If you can do that, yeah, he's not playing quarterback for you, but he'll make any quarterback under center better if he's healthy. Now, while the Saints are going to be focusing on their next quarterback, they do also need to find a way to stop opposing passers this offseason as well. And defensive linemen, we're going to be looking at the ones that you're going to want to watch as their combine drills and workouts begin on Thursday that could have an immediate impact. Today's episode brought to you by our friends over at FanDuel. FanDuel is the #1 sportsbook in America, and it's easy to understand why. They have a fantastic FanDuel Sportsbook app that's super safe, that's super easy, super secure, very easy to use. You can bet on everything that you can imagine, from the money line to the spread. If you're an NBA person, you can bet on point scores, threes drained. If you're an NFL person, you can bet on rushing yards, over-unders, individual performance. You can even do same-game parlays as well that help you maximize your return. And best of all, if you're a new customer right now, you can even get a no-sweat first bet of up to $1,000. Those are bonus bets that come back to you if your first bet doesn't win, which means there's no losing when it comes to your first bet over at FanDuel. So don't miss your chance right now at that no-sweat first bet of up to $1,000 in bonus bets when you go to FanDuel.com/locked-on. That's FanDuel.com/locked-on to learn more. Make every moment more with FanDuel, an official sports betting partner of the NBA. All right, family, continuing on with today's episode of Locked On Saints. Thanks again, as always, making Locked On Saints your first listen of the day every day. Here is part of Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. So the Saints absolutely need to address their defensive line this offseason. And you could see some of the players that could end up helping them return to form over on the defensive line as early as today, Thursday, whenever you're watching this episode or listening to this episode. in their combine workout. So we're going to take a look at 4 players here, and I'll list off a couple of others that you should know as well. On the interior, we're going to discuss Pitt Panther, right? Pitt Panther defensive tackle Kalijah Kancey. We'll go a little quickly on him because I know we've focused on him a lot here on the show, but some folks may not have heard any of those episodes, so I do want to highlight him a little bit, especially before his workout. We'll also discuss Wisconsin defensive tackle Keanu Benton. And then on the edge, at the edge rusher position, we'll take a look at Northwestern defensive end Adetomiwa Adebawore, as well as Ohio State defensive end Zach Harrison. Now, there's going to be Saints Wires articles out there for you every day, saintswire.usatoday.com, that are getting you ready with 3 prospects to know at every position. Obviously, there are more at each position to know as well, but I just want to narrow down on ones that are good fits for the New Orleans Saints. Now, let's talk about first why it is that these 2 positions are needs. We can do that pretty quickly, right? Defensive tackle is a need because, hey, they ain't got no defensive tackles under contract in 2023. Nice and easy. You're hoping that they're going to retain David Onyemata, but Shai Tuttle, Malcolm Roach, Kentavious Street, all free agents who were all on 1-year deals last year. Edge rusher is a need because a couple of different things. Future of the position. You have an aging, couple of players that are there, and you don't know what the future is when it comes to Marcus Davenport or Peyton Turner. So getting some young players in to help you out and help you in terms of solidifying your future at the position, obviously a wise choice. So let's start off here with the 2 defensive tackles, Kalijah Kancey and Wisconsin defensive tackle. Sorry, Kalijah Kancey of Pittsburgh, and Wisconsin defensive tackle Keanu Benton. So as we've discussed before here with Kalijah Kancey, one of the top defensive tackles in this year's class. Yes, he is undersized at his position, 6 foot, 280 pounds. Spoke with media at the combine today saying that he was playing around 275, weighing in around 280 right now. Feels pretty good in terms of where he is. Probably could still put on a little bit more weight as well. Sees himself very much as a 3-tech penetrating defensive tackle. That's the value that he brings to the New Orleans Saints, is that of an interior pass rusher, a very disruptive player. He led all defensive tackles last year across the nation in college football with 14.5 tackles for a loss. Also notched 7.5 sacks in just 11 games. He is absolutely one of the best interior pass rushers in this year's class. So what are some of the things that you're going to be looking for him while you're going to be looking for that initial burst off of the 40-yard dash, as well as vertical leap and broad jump, so you can measure a little bit of his explosiveness. Be curious to see his bench press numbers as well, because of the fact that that could play a factor in terms of his upper body strength, and telling you a little bit of that story as well. Right now, he's a player that you should expect to be drafted in round 1 or round 2 of this year's NFL draft. Would be a good fit for the New Orleans Saints because he is an outstanding pass rusher. Keanu Benton of Wisconsin, on the other hand, a good fit for the New Orleans Saints because he could help them get a little bit better when it comes to the run game, which is a place where that interior struggled last year. At 6'4", 315 pounds, he's not as big as Malcolm Brown, but he plays that nose tackle role much like Malcolm Brown did. You remember New Orleans Saints former nose tackle Malcolm Brown. They traded him away to the Jacksonville Jaguars years ago and have never had a player quite like him ever since. Keanu Benton could be that guy. Remarkable power, really, really good size, as we just laid out. And he's that type of defensive tackle that's going to not get moved off the line of scrimmage, which was a big issue for the Saints last year on the interior. They were consistently having the defensive line reset on them. And he's also one of those guys that, while being somebody that could be a run stuffer for you, he can take up a double team, manhandle a bit of a double team, and get you these one-on-one situations elsewhere for guys like David Onyemata, guys like Cam Jordan, and guys like Carl Granderson, and potentially Peyton Turner, Marcus Davenport, and maybe a rookie edge rusher to be able to win those one-on-one matchups. That was a big part of what made Malcolm Brown so special with New Orleans. Keanu Benton could fill a similar role. Expect to see Keanu Benton currently projected in rounds 3 and 4, but could work his way up the boards with a good combine workout. There, you're going to be looking for all the explosiveness factors, and then, of course, the 40-yard dash as well. Okay, let's take a look now at edge rushers. Again, here, you're not necessarily looking for guys that are going to be full-time starters right away. I think your full-time starters are pretty much set between Cam Jordan and Carl Granderson, but Cam Jordan's entering the last year of his contract, and really so is Carl Granderson, unless they find a way to extend him before this year. So guys like Northwestern defensive end Adetomiwa Adebawore, who is about 6'2", 280 pounds, could come in and help to rotate at the position. He's a disruptive player. He's got an array of pass rushing moves, deploys his pass rushing plan very well. Impressive showing at the Senior Bowl, of course, where New Orleans was heavily represented. 30 total pressures in each of the last 2 seasons, totaling just 9.5 sacks. So you'd like to see him finish a little bit more. No New Orleans Saints fans are tired of seeing almost sack after almost sack. Adebawore has a little bit of that tendency in him. He's good for a missed tackle a game, but being able to convert some of those pressures over to sacks would be a huge part of making him somebody that could be, you look at his draft projection right now as somebody maybe second, third round, but could turn him into somebody that would have been a first round value at the next level. So Adetomiwa Adebawore out of Northwestern, absolutely somebody to watch. You're watching 3-cone drill. You're watching burst off the line of scrimmage, first 10-yard split. You're looking at all of those other explosive measurements as well, broad jump, vertical leap, all of that. Oh, and of course, that hoop drill that we were talking about with the big hula hoops kind of on the ground with the tennis balls where you can watch them bend, you can watch them bend the edge, you can watch their flexation, all of those things. Here's another player that I really like in this year's draft. Already checks the box of the usual prototype, right? Adebawore a little bit short, 6'2", 6'3" is probably where he's going to measure in. Zach Harrison of Ohio State, though, comes in at the Saints' usual prototype, 6'5", 270 plus pounds. So with that should automatically put him in the running. And I guess it doesn't hurt that he's an Ohio State Buckeye either. Now, that obviously helps a ton, but what is it that he brings to the table? Dominant player at times, right? You want to see that it'll be a little bit more consistent, but still dominant player at times, long and athletic, very strong upper body, not a guy that has so much length on the upper body that the muscle's ill-distributed, and so he's not as powerful. He's got power and he's got length up at the top as well, so he's able to extend, get that distance, take advantage of the leverage of those offensive linemen. Another very polished pass rusher, when it comes to his pass rushing plan that can be further built upon as well. So a really nice floor to start off with. That's not the same thing as starting off with a raw prospect from a small school. This is a guy that is pass rushing in the Big Ten, that's run defending in the Big Ten, that's working in a pro-ready system that the New Orleans Saints have always leaned on about the offensive and defensive sides of the ball, and gets his hands up in the throwing lanes as well. He had 4 passes defense in 2022. He had a few more the year before that. He also has forced 3 fumbles in 2022 as well, something you want to see the New Orleans Saints maybe doing a little bit more of when they do get to the quarterback. His draft projection currently in the 3rd round, would not be surprised to see him bolster that draft stock over the course of his draft process. Now, any of these players are in shape to step in at the Caesars Superdome and immediately start in a rotational aspect when it comes to them and their immediate impact. And that's the type of return you want to see from the New Orleans Saints when they go after these defensive linemen. Some other guys for you to watch over the course of this weekend. Florida defensive tackle Gervon Dexter, who does have a strong connection to the New Orleans Saints now. The Saints hired former Florida Gators defensive coordinator Todd Grantham, and is now the New Orleans Saints defensive line coach, so there's a little bit of a connection there. Michigan defensive tackle Mozzie Smith, who is extremely disruptive and very talented as well. Texas defensive tackle Keandre Coburn, who I've told you about before, great run defender and probably like number 1 overall selection for me in terms of character, right? Like all character draft, 100% he's right there. Other edge rusher names to watch: Lucas Van Ness out of Iowa has never started a game, but boy, does he have all the tools. Isaiah Foskey out of Notre Dame. Not only is he somebody that matches the Saints prototype to a T, he's one of the highest producing edge rushers in this year's class, so you can see the results as well. And then Boise State defensive end Carl Brooks, which is a really interesting one because he didn't actually get invited to the combine, but definitely somebody to take a little bit of time and research on your own as well. We'll come back to him over the course of the draft process. Don't forget his name. Now, sticking on the defensive side here in just a moment, the Saints do want to be more disruptive up front, absolutely, but coverage can help that happen. Saints tend to get pressure on quarterbacks deep after the snap. So, even though they're a bit unheralded when it comes to Saints draft discussions, defensive back and linebacker could have some impact and be worth investing at the right place and with the right price. We got that coming up for you as we continue on to wrap up today's episode of Locked On Saints. Let's Let's get it. Who Dat Nation, wrapping up today's episode of Locked On Saints, part of Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day, here with you every single Monday through Friday. And look, if you've been here long enough, and if you've been a Saints fan over the course of the past couple of years, if there's anything that you've learned about the New Orleans Saints, it's that they don't have the impactful depth anymore, or at least over the course of the past couple of years, that they had back in like 2017 to 2020. I think that's fair to say. So these are some players in the back half of the defense, even though they're not necessarily at positions of need, that could help to fix that. So we're going to look at a couple different ones here. For DBs, we're mostly going to focus on safeties, but one is maybe a little bit more of a corner than he's being represented as. So we're going to start with DBs here, talking Texas A&M safety, Antonio Johnson. I'll tell you why I'm giving the air quotes on safety there. And Penn State safety, Jair Brown. Then at linebacker, we're going to take a look at Oregon linebacker Noah Sewell and Tulane's Dorian Williams. So I want to start off with the DBs here. So if you think about Antonio Johnson out of Texas A&M, a guy that is projected to be a first or second round safety. Remember, safety is a really tricky one to gauge the draft stock on because it all kind of depends upon who's available in free agency. I guess that's true for every position, but safety is one of those ones that's highly impacted by who is filled on the market, not necessarily like who's just available in the draft, right? So the comparison for safety, because of the positional value, is so much wider than it is just the one piece. So when you think about Antonio Johnson, what I would want you to think about is a 6'3", 6'2", 195-pound slot safety. Not necessarily just a safety, but think about him more in the role that was played by C.J. Gardner-Johnson before he was traded off this past season. He's a very good tackler, very disruptive player. He can blitz. He can play away from the line of scrimmage as well, can do some of the coverage things. Doesn't have the turnover numbers and things like that you would expect for a first-round safety, but he is so good in what is now such an impactful position, or a position that's growing in impact when it comes to being a slot defender, whether that's a corner or whether that's a safety, that he could be a really interesting one to watch, right? What's going to happen with Bradley Roby 1 year from now? Could the Saints get ahead of that a year early and grab a guy like Antonio Johnson who can step into the slot whenever they need to? Oh, and by the way, Bradley Roby dealing with injuries, coming off of injury in 2022, all of those things. Could he be somebody that could not only see time during his rookie year, but be the future of the Saints slot position moving forward? I think that he could be, so definitely a name to watch. Meanwhile, Penn State's Jair Brown is a little bit more of a deep safety, sideline to sideline coverage capability guy, just not a very solid tackler. So seeing him as a special teamer early on might be the way to go, but also you're a little bit worried about him as a special teamer because of that sort of tackling inconsistency. But what he can do as a ball hawk, and again, he doesn't have the turnover numbers. There's not really a ton of safeties in this class that have the turnover numbers, right? But a guy like Jair Brown has the skill set that you can build upon, train, all of that, especially with a guy like Marcus Robertson now in the building for the New Orleans Saints as their secondary coach. And then Joe Woods, who's also a secondary specialist and has been very effective and impactful as a defensive passing game coordinator, as well as a developer of secondary talent when he's focusing on that, not calling defenses, installing defenses, and architecting defenses, which is what he won't be doing in New Orleans. That's still going to very much be Dennis Allen. Plugging a guy like Jair Brown, who is very likely going to be at this point, maybe a day 3 selection. Not a bad situation at all. And not a situation to where you would say, oh, well, the Saints wasted that pick. It's late. There's a lot of different things that can happen with those selections. Not a big deal if it doesn't pan out. Now, bouncing down to the second level, you want to talk about a guy that could potentially assist in the Saints being disruptive in the backfield? Well, Noah Sewell is that guy. 6'2", 250-ish pounds. There are a lot of folks that are talking about size concerns around him. So we'll see what the official measurements are. But if he comes in at 6'2", 6'3", 250 pounds, he's right there in the Saints range in terms of prototypes. They'd be very happy with that. And he fits similar to a Caden Ellis. So think of Noah Sewell as somebody that you could, add to the linebacker room, which, by the way, includes his brother, Nephi Sewell. but could also be somebody that if Caden Ellis gets a full-time role somewhere else and gets signed away over the course of the offseason, even though there is mutual interest in keeping him here in New Orleans, Sewell could be somebody that can come in as a very strong side linebacker option that can blitz and get after the defense. 61 pressures in total during his time in Oregon. Really, really good stuff. So he would be somebody that you would go after in place of Caden Ellis if you can't retain him over the course of the offseason, which fingers crossed, hopefully the Saints can. Meanwhile, Tulane's Dorian Williams becomes somebody that you can look at if the Saints do hold on to Caden Ellis. What is it that makes Dorian Williams different in that case? Well, he's more of a weak side coverage linebacker. See, when it comes to the linebacker position, your three positions are usually your middle linebacker, your strong side linebacker, which lines up heaviest to blockers, heaviest to where the offense, leans towards its personnel. And then your weak side linebacker lines up on the opposite side. Your weak side linebacker is more of the coverage person. He's the guy that will, track the linebacker or track the running back out of the backfield or line up with the tight end, things like that. While the strong side backer is a little bit more of what you call an on-ball linebacker, meaning that where the ball goes, he goes effectively. So he's either, defending the run, can drop in the coverage if you need him to drop in his own coverage as well. He might man up sometimes, but his focus for the most part is see ball, get ball. So he's defending the run, he's climbing the line of scrimmage, he's going after the quarterback. That weak side linebacker fit is better for Dorian Williams, who's a little bit on the lighter side and a little bit on the shorter side as well. I think he's going to come in at around 6 foot, maybe a shade over 225 pounds. So he's a little bit more like your Quan Alexander in a way. Not as tall as Quan, but similar frame. And the reason why you compare him to Quan is because he is an excellent coverage linebacker. Good speed, good body control, all of those things, can get sideline to sideline, can be a rangy coverage linebacker. So you think about him instead as somebody that would be able to drop back in the coverage while Pete Werner assumes that middle linebacker role for DeMario Davis in his future, right? But until then, Dorian Williams is just in the background developing, which you love because he's effectively going to be a late day 3 selection. Now he could raise his stock a little bit, but if you're talking about where he's projected right now, it's probably 5th, 6th, 7th round. So if you get an opportunity to grab a guy like that, you can. And then if Ellis stays on the team, then he gets to serve those early down roles and serve multiple different purposes on your defense. So those are a couple of players. Again, Texas A&M safety Antonio Johnson, as well as Penn State safety Jair Brown. Antonio Johnson, a little bit more of a slot safety, so you can call him a corner or safety, whichever you prefer. Oregon's Noah Sewell, and then Tulane's Dorian Williams. A couple of other players to keep in mind at this position. Both of the Florida safeties, again, with Todd Grantham in the building, those Florida defenders, there's a lot of connection there. We'll speak with Brandon Olson of Locked On Gators about that next week. So Rashad Torrance as well as Trey Dean, both worth watching. Maryland cornerback Deonte Banks picking up a lot of steam in terms of what he could be, and the Saints could continue to build on a strength. And that would be one of the reasons why you go after these linebackers, after these corners, after these safeties, is that late round selections in day 3, building on strengths becomes just as important, I guess you can say, as drafting top talent at positions of need, especially when depth has been an issue for your team as of late. And then finally, Iowa linebacker Jack Campbell, who Daniel Jeremiah himself highlighted as somebody worth Saints fans paying attention to over the course of this draft process. So coming up tomorrow, we'll do something very similar to this. I'll keep you up to date on everything that we're hearing at the Combine. By the time you're watching this, or listening to this, I'm probably on a flight to Indianapolis right now. So, we'll get you caught up with everything that I heard at the Combine in Indianapolis, and also take a look at the players on the offensive side that you should be paying attention to over the course of the weekend. Quarterbacks, wide receivers, tight ends, O-line, running back. We'll hit it all as we continue on here throughout the week on Locked On Saints. Thank you very much, as always, making us your first listen of the day. For your second listen, make sure you get more of your NFL draft coverage over at Locked On NFL Draft. Damian Parson, Keith Sanchez, giving you everything you need to know about the nation's top NFL draft prospects, as well as the sleepers that can change your favorite franchise. You can find that wherever you get your podcasts and on YouTube. Part of Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. Thanks so much, as always, y'all, for making me a part of your day, a part of your routine, for saying yes to me and the show. As always, if you see me, say hi. And if you need anything else around your New Orleans Saints in between these episodes, make sure you follow me on Twitter at Ross Jackson, NOLA. Hit me up. Let me know how the family's doing. Let me know how you're living. Let me know how your mom and them. And trust Who Dat Nation, I'll holla at you.